So British Pakistani boys in Birmingham, education and the role of religion in the land of the Trojan horse. Religion appeared because of something one of the parents said and steered it towards religion, whereas previously my research was about education. And the Trojan horse appeared because when I submitted the thesis to a publisher, we talked about where it was, and we decided to use that. So in the land of the Trojan horse is a euphemism for Birmingham. Okay, a bit of background on me. I was born in Kashmir. I'm a first-generation immigrant. I was living there happily, minding my own business in a simple world. We walked everywhere. There was one school, primary school, where we sat on the floor writing on a takhti, which is a wooden board, and there was one teacher for the whole school, so those of us responsible were appointed as monitors. We walked everywhere. There were no roads in our area. There was no running water, no electricity. Our world was in many ways perfect. It was self-contained, and that's where I was until my parents decided that I would have a better future in the UK, where I had family members living. And my parents were absolutely right, because for me this has been the land of opportunity. So 50 years ago I came to the UK and learned English to begin with, spent 2 or 3 years in school, left school at 16 with 2 or 3 what was then CSEs, Certificate of Secondary Education, and started to work and carry on with my learning in the evenings. So for 6 years I went to evening classes, and then I had enough qualifications to go to teacher training, one of the higher education institutions in Birmingham, West Hill College of Higher Education for teacher training, and carried on learning, and a couple of years ago finished my PhD. So as well as a pupil, I've been a teacher, schools advisor, community activist, parent, resident in Birmingham. My main claim to fame was about early on in the century. I was an education advisor, and I discovered that the largest underachieving group were white working class boys, boys on free school meals. Nationally were the largest underachieving group, and white girls on free school meals were the second largest underachieving group. But no one seemed to care about it. So I, an immigrant who sometimes was picked on by white people, white working class people, I decided that actually I would research them. And so my 15 minutes of fame came when I managed to persuade a Birmingham Member of Parliament to take my research to, or my report to Parliament. So in 19th of May 2009, there was an adjournment debate on the white disadvantage educational underachievement, which was wholly focused on my report. And things might have happened on the national scene because of that, but the following year you'll remember there was an election and the government changed, and it has been ever thus. And when I started doing my PhD, I wasn't sure what to focus on, but I decided to focus on a new group of people, which was the Pakistani children. I'd written a book called Dear Birmingham, which is on Pakistani exclusion in the city. So around the time I started my PhD, I started to do the generic book on Pakistani exclusion. I've been a diversity and education consultant for the past 20 years, and including for the Department of Education. Now much of my focus is on this issue. So, to give you a bit of background on the Pakistani situation in Birmingham, Pakistani children, the last, when there was a time when local authorities published these kind of information data on what was happening. They don't do it anymore. 2011, Birmingham published some statistics which showed that Pakistani children were a quarter of the school population. And I believe now they're about a third of the school population, which makes them the largest ethnic group in Birmingham schools. While I was studying the educational achievement of white working class children, I had statistics on Pakistani children. And so for the last maybe 20 years, over 1,000 leave school every year in Birmingham without the right qualifications. And so when I started to do my PhD, I decided that this would be a good subject to look at, to unpick why such underachievement was happening. And the other statistics that is worth pointing out is that overall Muslim population in Birmingham is quite significant. A third of the city has been Muslim for a number of years. And you will see the proof of that from 2014, these two figures from a local newspaper, which shows there are more Muslim children in Birmingham schools than there are any other religious group, and including the Christians. My research was conducted in 3 state secondary schools using a mixed methods approach. There was a questionnaire that completed by 219 students across the ethnic groups, and I interviewed 24 Pakistani boys and 16 Pakistani parents. And the Pakistani boys were all born in Birmingham. So they were British Pakistani children. Some of them were second generation, and some of them, one or two were third generation. And I've extensively drawn on my own story, my own experience as a learner, as a practitioner in the education world. So, what does education mean? Very early on, a parent explained to me that religion was very important for them. And they explained that in the Muslim context, education is not just GCSEs or other qualifications that are on offer. Education is broader. And here you'll see 3 elements. It was explained to me, and I've researched it, and 3 elements: knowledge, which is ta'lim; growth and development, which is tarbiyah; and tahzeeb, which is culture, morals, manners, discipline, how you conduct yourself. It was also apparent in the research that Pakistani community, parents and children had a great deal of respect for education and for teachers. From the 40 interviews I did, there were over 100 references to education and respect for education. So education, it was clear to me, was critical, highly important for the people I was interviewing and researching. But they also wanted more. My research confirmed previous research. Halstead has been one of the long-standing people who have researched this area, and he, in 1986, pointed out that for Muslims, there were two dimensions to education. One was to do the best as you can in schools and in terms of GCSEs, but the other was religious education. In other words, Islamic education. And the other research that has been done, which I also confirmed, was Berglund, who said that teachers were respected only behind parents and God. So, really important for Muslim children. I think it was the second or third parent I interviewed who inserted the word religion into my research. When I asked him, I was interviewing him. This was an ordinary guy. He was working on that day as a carpet fitter, and he had come home to be interviewed by me. I felt really privileged that he'd given his time, and he was sitting there, and I interviewed him in his own language. And I just happened to ask him what education meant for him. And he said to me, but for us it's both deen and dunya. Deen is religion, dunya is the world. We think both are important. The majority of people from our community believe that deen is very important alongside the rest of education. Without deen, the child won't know where they've come from. We should have both deen and dunya. They have equal importance. And then other parents, since that conversation, said to me that Dini education for them was obligatory as part of being a good parent. So a Muslim parent generally, I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions, but generally will make sure that their child is brought up knowledgeable about Islam. That would be a priority as part of their upbringing. They will invest money in it. They send them to mosques and Islamic centers, pay good money for that. But they all see it as a farz, which is Urdu for obligation. Another parent explained to me what being educated meant. He used the term adab and akhlaq, manners and morals. And he said, I would not like it for him to just achieve a very high grade in school. That is one aspect of it. That is needed for success in life. You know, he needs to have good knowledge of things and, this is original emphasis, develop his, and there's an error there, develop his overall personality as well. It's above all about personality, the overall personality, which needs both religious education and secular education. So I moved on, and I then posed these questions in a questionnaire, and this is perhaps, if there was one slide, one set of statistics, this would be it. This is central to my research. It is central to the society that is in Birmingham and a number of other towns and cities. Religion is highly important amongst the Pakistani community. And it's been confirmed before my research and confirmed since my research. And you can see its importance, that for Pakistanis, 89% said, my religion is very important in my life, agree and strongly agree. And then you compare it to the white British children, 28% of whom said religion was very important for them. So what does it mean when you're religious and you find as a parent and as a child that the school you're attending is not giving you enough Islamic education? Of course there is RE, but it's not enough. What do you do? And what I found in Birmingham, what you do is you send your child parallel with schooling from the age of 4 or 5 until they're 16, 17. You send them to religious classes in somebody's home, in a mosque, or somewhere else, almost on a daily basis. So, but what is the cost of such classes? They miss out on all the things that go on in a school after the formal day finishes. Extracurricular learning, maybe intervention classes, maybe do extra homework. It has an impact on community cohesion because when you attend those informal activities, you make friends with children who are from groups who you don't normally socialize with. You miss out on those. There's time pressure on you. By going to a day school and then going to evening classes, by the time you finish and you come home, you're tired. You may not have energy for homework. It's a burden on the parents. They have to pay for it. And sometimes there are safeguarding implications of such provision because some of the teachers may not have been police checked. Nor is there any necessarily check on what is taught. So if they wanted to teach something, one of the parents expressed to me concern that they worry sometimes that the wrong things may be taught to these children by somebody who has wrong beliefs. It's worth looking at the lack of coherence in the children we're talking about. Pakistanis for a long time have been found to be leading disjointed lives, where the school world, the mosque world lives are in 3 different compartments with very little coherence between them. And it's also been pointed that when you go to the mosque schools, some of them operate methodologies that are very different from what may be happening during the day. So the children are exposed to conflicting and contradictory methodologies. And it's clear in terms of the benefits of greater congruence between education and within education. In terms of education is better through the links. The Bullock report in 1975 pointed that out. I've also drawn on the concept Moll and others, funds of knowledge, that schools should make use of the funds of knowledge of children that they bring to the school. I've made a case for a culturally relevant pedagogy, and also the schools should draw on the Muslim funds of knowledge. So with the backdrop of the importance of religion, I asked the question about importance of teachers, diversity amongst teachers and teachers' understanding. And a few things worth sharing with you. Children said it was very important for them to have teachers from their own ethnic group and from their own religious group. And a very high percentage said it was very important for teachers to understand their religion. Schools, we know, are relational environments. And to form a relationship with anyone, you have to understand each other, and there has to be communication. So it is absolutely critical that teachers have an understanding of the children and the worlds they're from and the worlds they are existing parallel with the school lives. I found there was an article in the Times Educational Supplement in 2011 which said that teachers had a tabloid understanding of Islam and religion generally. My research confirmed that. Many teachers had very little understanding of the lives of the children and very little understanding of what Islam was about. I've made a case in the research for more minority teachers, and there's plenty of research which points to the importance of such teachers. They bring a certain expertise that adds value to education. They're cultural brokers, more able to challenge racism, and provide that continuity between the children's lives outside of school and within school. And now Baroness Morris, who was Secretary of State for Education at the time, in 1997 said a diverse workforce was good for all children. And there is a small amount of research which has pointed that diversity is good for and makes an impact on educational achievement. Another area that I looked at was Pakistani participation, Pakistani representation in the workforce and in the decision-making bodies. And what we have in Birmingham, what we had then and what we have now, is a colonial model of education where sometimes you will have a class or a school with as much as 100% Muslim children, and you may have very small percentage of teachers and very small percentage of governors who are from the local Muslim community. And there are one or two extreme cases where I found that absolutely no Pakistani teachers were employed in some schools when they had significant number of Pakistani children, and absolutely no one was involved on the governing body. Inadvertently, through the process, I discovered that there was a very low level of understanding of what I would call race literacy. It seems as if race and multicultural education has gone off the national teacher training agenda and is now showing up as ignorance. Some basic concepts are not being understood by teachers. And of course, we now have a fairly complex system of education. Somebody's described it as a broken system of education with the demise of local authorities and increase of multi-academy trusts, which has meant that the education system that we have now has become quite disjointed, which is adding to the problems in places like Birmingham. In Birmingham, we also have, alongside the demise of the local authority, there is a parallel local authority called the Birmingham Education Partnership. And I use this photo to illustrate how little importance they attach to staff diversity. And I've looked into how many Pakistanis are involved in their governing bodies and amongst their staff. And this photo speaks for itself. And then I was curious, what was it that Muslims wanted in education? Some of you may be aware of the Spence report, which said that there was a time when in this country, white parents also placed an emphasis on religious education, that knowledge of scripture was seen as very highly important. The talk from Bishop of Oxford, summed up in this paper that was produced in whole or in part, was a Christian perspective on the nature of education. And then there was a quote from a Holocaust survivor who made a plea that education should produce human beings and not just knowledgeable and qualified people. I think I'm probably speaking to experts here on this particular subject of religion. Marius Felderhoff and others spoke about the lack of place for God in education. You will know more about it than I will, of the nature of RE. And it's that problem that Muslim parents, they're well aware of what RE is and how much emphasis it places on God and religion. And certainly they're aware of how much emphasis it places on Islam. That is the reason they do their own thing. So, we come to this controversial issue of Trojan horse, which I am pleased to say that I managed to skirt around during my PhD. And none of the three schools I researched were implicated. So I completed my PhD, and then I submitted the thesis, rewrote sections, agreed with the publisher that we would have In the Land of the Trojan Horse in the book title, and then I wrote the chapter 2 of my book is on Trojan horse. And so what is Trojan horse? It's something that happened in 2012, 2013, 2014, and in some ways hasn't stopped happening, when schools were accused, Muslims were accused of having a particular agenda, and Ofsted were used for the government's agenda to deal with those schools. And so let me just read you a couple of things from my book. There was a school called Park View. It's changed its name since then. Michael Wilshaw, the chief inspector, visited them, and he said, I quote, "You can see a good school as soon as you walk in." And then later he wanted other schools to follow the example of Park View Academy. And there were a number of newspapers which, following his visit to the school, they wrote about the school and saying how wonderful it was. Another thing that I talk about in my book is there were 21 schools implicated, and one of those was Oldknow School. And Oldknow School had taken children to Saudi Arabia as part of his Arabic teaching program. Pre-Trojan Horse, they were inspected in 2013, and they were an outstanding school. And this is what the report said, Ofsted report on Oldknow. The Academy does all it can to remove any barriers to learning and to ensure that every pupil has equal opportunities to succeed. The large amount of pupil premium funding is used to subsidize uniforms, trips, and even large-scale trips such as the ones to Saudi Arabia to ensure that any pupil is able to participate. So he's using that trip as an example of good practice and put that quote in his report. Remember, this trip has already happened in the past, so it happened before 2013. The following year, when Oldknow was one of the 21 schools, Ofsted went back with a different lens, different agenda, maybe a different briefing note from the Department of Education. We're yet to find out. This is what they said on that same trip. Leaders have not assessed adequately the risks to pupils associated with trips, visitors, and links with other institutions. For example, the Academy has links with a school in Saudi Arabia, but could not tell inspectors whether risk assessment had been carried out on the people or the materials that pupils may come into contact with. And now, Oldknow School was placed into special measures. When I was interviewed, I made friends with a local journalist and prepared him for the publication of my book, and did a fairly extensive interview which was published in Birmingham Mail. And in the conversation, I had talked about that there will be other Trojan horses. And this was the headline, City on the Brink of Trojan Horses. And then earlier last year, I was contacted by the same journalist who said, you remember saying there would be other Trojan horses when the opposition to teaching of certain lessons and certain resources on lesbian and gay parenting hit the press at a local level. It was presented as a second Trojan horse. And I was done an interview for that. And again, you can find that on the Birmingham Mail. And since then, this is my most recent comment on Trojan horse for the BIRA blog, BIRA website. My sense is that there will be future Trojan horses. What might help to prevent such Trojan horses and other conflicts in a place like Birmingham is a responsive and a coherent education that brings the religion and the school world together, the deen and the dunya, the outside of school hours and the inside of school hours lives together. That things like Islamic studies, Urdu and Arabic are taught in the regular school curriculum. I've made a case for more Pakistani and more Muslim teachers and governors. I've made a case for better understanding by teachers of the Muslim community and a greater partnership and a greater trust that used to exist. We need to go back to it. It's been seriously damaged by, firstly, Trojan horse, and subsequently, you could say Trojan horse 2 and 3, with the activities going on, and continues to be damaged because of the broken education system that we have and the lack of coherence with the demise of local authorities. And lastly, because I'm in an educational and a research institution, I would encourage you to do more research on the education of Pakistani children, because not enough has been researched. Of course, there is current focus on British values and prevent and extremism and those kinds of things, but education and achievement of children such as the Pakistanis who my most recent kind of research was that last year 12,000 of Pakistani children left British schools or English schools without the right qualifications. And I'm concerned that I think it's well known what happens when you don't do well at school, in all the cost associated with all the negative outcome of that. And I'm concerned that such extensive failure across the UK, across England, is actually going to impact on not just the Pakistani community, but also wider society. And in areas like Birmingham, Bradford, and one or two other areas, Pakistanis are a significant number in the community. And their lack of success is going to eventually impact on the local community. There are a few references. I think now we'll stop and take some questions. Yeah.
Do you think that in order to have a greater cultural integrity, that it would be a good step to have Muslim schools, and that the community would then be much happier within themselves, that the best parts of their culture is being sustained?
Not a single parent I spoke to, nor a single child I spoke to, made a case for more Muslim schools. What they expect is the state system, the state schools, to be accommodating, to have more Pakistani and Muslim teachers, and for the teachers to understand the culture and the religion and be connected with the community. So I know some people have spoken before about there aren't enough Muslim schools, but I didn't find a single person making that case. And I certainly don't advocate. In fact, I'm of the view that was made by the Swan Report in 1985 was that if the state system accommodates Muslim needs and Muslim community and its idea of education, there will be less of a need for separate Muslim schools. So I don't advocate Muslim schools.
Looking at it from the other side then, if schools are becoming culturally and religiously more complex,
Yes.
are they in fact able to cope with that complexity?
Well, they should be able to. I think that's what multicultural education has been about for many years. I know it's gone off the agenda, and we're in a colorblind, one-size-fits-all education system, as was pointed to me by the Department of Education during my research. They wrote to me and said, you know, what New Labour and others did before about multicultural education and about having initiatives on Black Caribbeans and Pakistanis and Turkish and what have you. They said, we've done away with that. We're now into treat everybody the same. And so I'm making a case that we are responsive to children in that kind of multicultural society, so that teachers understand them. And of course, in some schools, there are different ethnicities, different linguistic groups, different religious groups. Of course, it makes demands on teachers to understand all of them. But I think we should. The system should enable teachers through both teacher training and CPD. In fact, I've made a case for a 3-stage teacher education. Pre-teacher education, teachers should be expected to have knowledge and understanding of multicultural society. Then teacher education, to do its job, whatever it can. And some of you are actually, you have that responsibility. And you will know how limited a time you have. And then I've made a case that after they leave the teacher education and go into school, they should continue with their learning. So it's a lifelong learning, lifelong continuous professional development. But I accept, you know, it's complex and it can be a tall order, but yeah.
So I'm totally with you on teachers and school staff being aware and educated, you know, to a level of understanding of different cultures and beliefs. You know, it builds that teacher-student gap and all that stuff. I think it's really important. But from your experience in interviewing those families, do you think, what's your opinion on what they might, their ideas on children being given, for example, philosophical teachings, moral ethics classes, whilst also being educated through RE
Yes.
to know about all the different worldviews, so still keeping the state schools secular, as it were, to not give a bias to one religion or
Yes.
another, while introducing them to those kind of trains of thought that might get them thinking about important things that their religion might deal with outside of school. So what do you think those, obviously were they all Muslim families?
Yes.
What do you think those families would think about that, having kind of a ethics program or a philosophy program in a school to deal with those issues, and then when the children get home, then the parents can put that through the religious kind of, I don't know.
Well, I've actually made a case that we should bring the two as close together as possible. And I've said that rather than children going off, leaving school, rushing home, and then going to some mosque or somebody's kind of dark and dingy room to be taught badly Islamic stuff, and the person may not have been police checked or anything. I'm actually saying that sort of thing should happen in a school building.
What I'm saying is that shouldn't happen in a school building.
No, I'm saying it should happen in a school building after the school is finished, after the normal day is finished. Okay, yeah. Some of you may be aware of the extended schools day we used to have, until about, until the current government came in. And that was from 8 o'clock till 6 o'clock. So I'm making a case for bringing that back. So schools as community buildings should remain open and should be utilized for some of that.
As like an after-school club.
After school, but done in an open environment. So, any child can learn. It's not compulsory. Any child, including non-Muslim children, can learn. And the people who are teaching it should be checked, should be properly trained, and should be inspected, and it's done in a proper way. So the children are not exposed to two conflicting messages. And eventually, I think, let's imagine areas like Birmingham, if you had to start afresh with an education system now, say there was no education system and you had to come up with one now, in a local authority which has the largest pupil religious group as Muslims, you would surely come up with a different idea, different way of educating them. You would surely try to have a coherent system that brings in the deen and the dunya, the religious and the non-religious. And if not now, maybe at some future point that will be the case, because the Pakistani and the Muslim presence in areas like Birmingham is increasing as we speak.
Okay. Anna, can I do a very quick follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
So you use the phrase Muslim child or Christian child quite a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
When I think about religion, it's thoughts and experiences about life, the universe, and everything. And you mentioned 4 and 5-year-olds being sent to mosques, which I do agree will be better done after school. Now that you've explained that, but my main issue is to what extent can a young child be called a Muslim or Christian or insert religion here child when they've not really had that time to consider life, the universe, and everything?
I'm fully with you with that. A fairly complex way of seeing the world. And I personally believe that religion is an adult decision, and my own kind of faith position is one of making adult choices. So I think, do we talk about a child who is 4 or 5 as a Muslim or a Christian? Are they old enough to make decisions? I think it's a long-standing discussion and debate that I probably won't enter.
Yeah,
okay? Yeah.
Hi, thanks very much. Really interesting. As always at these seminars, there's so many questions I
Yes.
ask now, and I'm going to hone in on this one, I think. You had statistics at the beginning that seemed to suggest your family's children were representative of a group who might be said to put it broadly, were failing at school. So
Yes.
there was significant underachievement in educational terms.
Yes.
And your families might well have put it that the dunya
Yes.
had not been successfully done.
Yes.
Did they also see that those children had failed at the other side, the deen? And if so, did they still blame the school for that? So if they failed at the worldly education, it's the school's fault. The school are not accommodating our needs. They're not teaching us properly. There aren't enough Pakistani Muslim teachers. If they failed at the deen,
Yes.
whose fault is that? What did your participants say?
They didn't say anything, and that is in itself a problem, because the thing, I'm conscious that I haven't looked at it, and so I'm kind of guessing, but there are some examples of good practice where middle class parents were able to do that deen much better. And how they did it much better is they were able to economically afford to employ a teacher who came to their house. And when a teacher comes to your house, they do a proper job because they know they're being watched. Somebody's paying them and they are being watched. And those children have more time for their schoolwork and for their dunya. Whereas the poorer parents were sending their children just to a school where they thought it was good. You know, it's part of being a Muslim parent, part of their obligation. They know when they're in front of God and God says, did you do a good job as a parent? They will say, yes, I did my best. I fed them, I clothed them, I sent them to a mosque. I fulfilled my obligation. Beyond sending their child to somebody's house or a center, they were not able to have an opinion or say in the quality of what was being taught. And my guess is it may be taught properly. A child doesn't need to go from the age of 5 to 16. I've said somewhere that actually maybe it should all be done by the time they leave primary school. And when they're in secondary school, maybe the children will already be enough knowledgeable about Islam and how to pray and be able to read the Quran that they now can concentrate on other things and maybe do some homework. So, and some of what I've suggested, I know is first time it's being suggested. So people like yourselves, who are the experts on religion and education, maybe can look at it and actually come up with different answers of what is happening. Because, and different answers must be found, because communities like Birmingham and Bradford and others where significant Muslim populations are here to stay. And this is a challenge for us all. So, but it's a good question, a good way of exploring.
Anecdotally, I
yes.
think second and third generation Muslims tend to be less religious than first generation Muslims.
No, it's almost the other way. If you look at the very early Muslims or people from Muslim countries, they weren't as explicitly religious. In fact, in the 50s and 60s, if you went to a Muslim house, you may not even find the Quran. There weren't the mosques in those areas. There wasn't the emphasis. It was only when families started to arrive and children and parents have become conscious of their obligation as parents, and the younger generation, following my research, Beat Freaks, an organization in Birmingham, did some research amongst young people, and it asked, it was looking at identity, and I know one or two of you are doing projects on identity and may want to look at that. They asked young people about their identity, and some parts of Birmingham, mainly white, they went to, and they found that actually young people said religion wasn't part of their identity. They went to B11, which is a mainly Muslim area. Religion was the top. So that is the kind of world, and I think in the new census we will probably find two kind of Birminghams. A Birmingham that has become and is becoming less religious. So the no religion people are on the increase in that part of Birmingham. But another part of Birmingham where religion is becoming even more important than it was in 2011. In 2011, as I did in my book, Dear Birmingham, the two areas where there was the most amount of religion were Pakistani areas. And the two areas where there was the least religion, or the most number of people who said no religion category, were mainly white. And of course, Muslims are on the move, so is a change. So I think it's actually the younger generation becoming much more consciously religious. And it's part of their identity as well. Honey, yeah?
I know we're getting short of time now.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, you said at the beginning about being interested in things that related to your study. I don't know if you're aware of something that was done, we're going back about 7 or 8 years ago, but in Pendle, in Building Bridges Pendle under Rauf Bashir.
Right.
He set up a group, obviously it was a bigger group than just Rauf, and what they were trying to do was to support the madrasas to be providing an education that was more like the children would be
Okay.
familiar with in school. And
Yes.
part of that was asking the children, the Muslim children, to actually ask their schools if they would be involved with that project. Now, I was involved right at the beginning. I don't know what happened to that.
Okay.
But that might be of interest to you. The
Sure.
question I was going to ask you was, in your study, did you actually consider the role of religious education within, actually as a subject within the school? Because to me, it's sort of inside out, isn't it? If good RE, and forgive me because I've been a few years out of the classroom, but certainly the RE I recognise is where you plan from the school community, the local community,
Yes.
the area
Yes.
community, etc. You plan from there, and then put an inquiry model in where young people, whoever they are, whatever faith, go and ask questions. And if you're looking into, say, Ummah or whatever it happens to be, then those young people are encouraged to go and talk with
Yes.
children from the faith that they're looking at. And in that way, it has obviously a multidimensional purpose there. And certainly when I was asking my students when I was still in the classroom, one thing that the Muslim children said was they liked the fact they were being asked, that they were being, not used because we'd always ask permission, but
Yes.
were being utilised as part of an inquiry.
Yes.
So they could then say, look, as a Muslim I think this, but so-and-so might think that, so it's not Islam. This is my interpretation of Islam. And as one boy said, I felt I was somebody within RE because of that.
Yes.
So my question is, did you actually look at what the RE departments were doing within your schools that you studied?
The simple answer is no.
Oh, what's
Because my focus, remember, was on educational achievement and with a kind of subtext of educational underachievement, and religion just surfaced as part of the lives of the children, and the time they were spending on it, and obviously as an opportunity cost. My thinking was, if they're spending time by going to mosque schools and so on after their normal school, they don't have the time for homework and just kind of having a break. And then I also found that some of the children were disadvantaged by not having somebody at home who could help them with their homework. And so I've made a case that actually we should have homework centres of the kind that we've had in the past during, you've guessed it, during New Labour Days and Extended Schools Days, when we used to have homework clubs in football centres and libraries and you name it. And so I'm making a case. And much of my recommendations are based on things that have been done in our own system at some point in the past. I'm just saying, do that more now, because that is what is necessary. But of course, all of this needs to be explored, discussed, unpicked, challenged, to come up with new ideas. And but one thing we must not do is to just move on and treat every child as if they were like any other child. They're not. And we must not just because we think we're a secular education system, must not forget that religion is critical part of children's lives and families. And so I am making a case that we pay a great deal of attention to this area. Okay. Anything else? Last minute?
Very quick one.
Yeah.
So I'm a trainee teacher.
Yeah.
What I strongly believe in creating diverse and multicultural environments for kids and adults. What advice would you give me for trying to sort things out at a grassroots level? Focusing on equality of opportunity and making sure that everyone gets a fair shake.
I would say to you,
One day it gets en masse.
I would say to you to learn about the children you're going to be teaching, especially if you don't happen to live in the area where you're working. If you can live in the area, great, but it's not always possible. If you don't live in the area, get to know the area, get to know the children, get to know the families, spend time consciously going outside of the school building. There's a phrase I use about commuter teachers who do an excellent job coming from somewhere into the school building, doing a long day and going away, and don't have any sense of the physical space where children go home to and do their shopping and do their leisure activities. So I would say education and teaching and working in the school is a relational job, and the more you will understand children and their background, the greater connection you will have. And the greater connection you have, you will get more out of them. It's what's called discretionary effort. Children will go the extra mile for you because they will know you care for them and you understand them and you connect with them. So whether it's on your school agenda or not, and one day it will be because you will be running a school yourself. But until then, make it your business to do that extra learning. Okay, I hope that's helpful.
That would need to be a very conscious and deliberate thing.
Yes.
But it's fascinating listening to your recommendations, particularly around foregrounding, reasserting multicultural education.
Yes.
And this, as you quite rightly say, has very much disappeared from the curriculum, disappeared from policy. In fact, what we see, in fact, is an aggressive disavowal of multiculturalism by our former Prime Minister.
Which one would be so many?
Yes.
Well, David Cameron.
Well,
Read his Munich
yeah.
speech.
Yeah.
And in the current environment, we find ourselves working under an Ofsted chief who talks about a mission of integration. She sees British values as the new civics, the new civic education. So it may be interesting for you as a trainee teacher at this institution to feed back your own views, perhaps on multicultural education, and what perhaps we as an institution might do to kind of speak to those sorts of agendas, because you don't know what you don't know, do you, until you're engaged in discussions like this.
It's just being alive is far more interesting.
Yeah.
When you've got all of, it'd be rubbish if everyone was just the same. It's so
Indeed.
rubbish.
I think the other thing that I would say to you is to work in partnership with the children and their parents and the wider community. My most recent blog for Optimus Education was on parental involvement, and we keep talking when it suits us, parents as the first educators of children, but we then forget to and fail to work in partnership with them. So that's another area as a new teacher arriving. Make it part of your kind of system to work in partnership with those other people who also input into the lives of your children. Okay.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate
Yeah.
your time this evening.
Yeah.
Cameron. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.